In many literary portraits of addiction, the crisis is not loss of control, it's the feeling that one's own future has already closed. In literature, few characters embody this more than four men from four different eras. Edmund Tyrone from Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, Sidney Carton from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, Jake Barnes from Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, and Heathcliff from Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Different centuries, different wounds, different addictions, but all of them share the same fate: a self that becomes impossible to inhabit, a life that becomes a verdict, an identity that turns inward and begins to destroy the person who carries it. This is addiction and identity in literature, and the tragic ways human beings collapse from the inside. Edmund Tyrone is the youngest son in O'Neill's autobiographical masterpiece, a play set over a single day in the life of a family drowning in alcoholism, regrets, and generations of unhealed wounds. Edmund suffers from tuberculosis, but the deeper illness is existential, a belief that he was born damaged. He speaks in poetic fragments about fog, the sea, and vanishing into silence. This isn't romanticism, it's depersonalization, a sense that he's already slipping out of reality.
Halfway down the path, you can't see this house. Never even know it was here. Everything looked and sounded unreal. It was like walking on the bottom of the sea, as if I'd drowned long ago, as if I was a ghost belonging to the fog, and the fog was the ghost of the sea. Felt damn peaceful to be nothing more than ghost within a ghost. Hmm. Don't look at me as if I'd gone nutty. Who wants to see life as it is if they can help it?
His drinking is not escapism, it is a way of confirming his darkest theory about himself: that he is made of the same decay that haunts his family. O'Neill gives us a man whose self awareness has become a form of self destruction. Sidney Carton is a brilliant but self loathing lawyer in Dickens' novel. Set against the chaos of the French Revolution, Carton drinks because he believes that his potential is gone, that any greatness he might have had has already been squandered. This is self-discrepancy theory in narrative form, the painful gap between who he is and who he believes he should have been. He sees himself as someone who cares for no man, and no man cares for him, even though it's not true. And yet, out of this despair comes one of literature's most beautiful transformations, a final act that doesn't erase his pain, but allows him to rewrite the meaning of his life.
Suddenly, I want to weep. But I must hold my tears in check, lest they think it is myself I weep for. And who would weep for Sidney Carton? A little time ago, none in all the world. But somebody will weep for me now. And that knowledge redeems a worthless life. Worthless, but for this final moment, which makes it all worthwhile. It is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest I go to than I have ever known.
Carton shows that a person can live in ruin for decades and still create a moment of profound moral clarity.
You know, it's been said that if you tell somebody not to do something, they're going to go right ahead and do it anyway because everybody has to learn for himself. But sometimes we can warn somebody by telling them something that happened to us that didn't work out well, and maybe we can help them to act more wisely than we did.
Jake Barnes arrives from a different angle, but he belongs to the same psychological constellation. In Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, Jake is an American journalist living in post-World War I Europe. He carries a physical wound from the war, an injury that has left him impotent, but the deeper wound is existential. Jake's problem is not addiction, but dislocation, a sense that the war has rewritten his identity without his consent. He loves Brett Ashley, but he cannot be with her. He participates in the Lost Generation rituals of drinking, travel, and destruction, but remains emotionally exiled from the world around him. Jake is marked by what psychologists today call moral injury, the rupture that occurs when a person's deepest sense of identity collides with an event that permanently alters it. He is the quietest of the four, but perhaps the clearest illustration of the theme. You can survive the trauma, but the self that survives is not the one that entered it. Jake's tragedy is not explosive, it's atmospheric. A life lived with a wound that cannot heal and a desire that cannot be fulfilled. He exemplifies the self that keeps moving yet never arrives. Heathcliff's tragedy is different from the others, but it completes the map of identity collapse, where Edmund dissolves into fog, Carton collapses under unrealized potential, and Jake is rewritten by war. Heathcliff is consumed by obsession. His identity fuses entirely with Catherine Earnshaw, not romantically, but existentially. Heathcliff does not see her as a beloved, he sees her as the structure of his being. Bronte gives him one of the most haunting declarations of fused identity in literature. Heathcliff's soul is not himself, but Catherine. Her death does not simply break his heart, it collapses his ontology. Modern psychology would call this trauma bonding or object constancy failure, a self so dependent on an external object that its removal becomes catastrophic. Heathcliff does not attempt to heal, he attempts to preserve the wound through revenge, cruelty, and spiritual fixation. Anything that keeps Catherine alive inside of him, even in torment. Toward the end, Heathcliff's longing turns into a quiet, deliberate self-erasure. He has the side of Catherine's coffin open and orders the same for his, so that in the grave, their bodies will touch as they decompose. He stops eating, stops sleeping, wanders the moors like a man already dead, waiting only for the moment he can join her. Heathcliff represents addiction, not to alcohol, nor despair, nor nihilism, but to another human being, a form of identity so intertwined with love that losing the beloved becomes losing oneself.
Oh, what's wrong with being drunk? What we're after, isn't it? Be always drunken. Nothing else matters. That is the only question. If you would not feel the horrible burden of time weighing on your shoulders and crushing you to the earth, be drunken and tin-doing. Drunken with what? With wine, with poetry, or with virtue, as you will, but be drunken. And if sometimes on the stairs of a palace, or on the green side of a ditch, or in the dreary solitude of your own room, You should awaken and the drunkenness be half or wholly slipped away from you. Ask of the wind, or of the wave, or of the star, or of the bird, or of the clock, of whatever flies, or sighs, or rocks, or sings, or speaks. Ask what hour it is, and the wind, wave, star, bird, clock will answer you. It is the hour to be drunk.
Contemporary discussions of addiction tend to emphasize pathology and recovery, but these literary portraits suggest something more foundational. Addiction can serve as a metaphor for the individual's struggle to endure meaninglessness, to manage temporal dislocation, and to reconcile internal contradictions. Psychology calls this identity enmeshment. Philosophy calls it despair. Literature calls it tragedy. Each of these portraits, however distinct, reveals a life shaped by the search for a story that can hold them. Some move toward death, some toward sacrifice, others toward withdrawal, endurance, or obsession. The forms diverge, but the movement is the same. A desperate attempt to stabilize a self that has slipped out of its own grasp. In the end, these men are not symbols of failure. They are case studies in what happens when consciousness turns inward and finds no ground. Their pain does not elevate them. Literature does not excuse their addictions. It simply reveals what the clinical view might overlook: the existential conditions that make addiction intelligible, something unresolved, something worth examining. A person can survive illness, trauma, heartbreak, and even war, and still be undone by the idea of who they are. Edmund cannot imagine a future. Carton cannot forgive his past. Jake cannot return to the version of himself that existed before the war. Heathcliff cannot bear a self that exists without Catherine. Each man faces the void in his own way, and through them, we glimpse the cost of self-awareness when unmoored from hope. They remind us that the struggle for coherence is ongoing, and that for some, the burden of identity becomes too heavy to bear, not because they are weak, but because they are lucid. In this, literature does what it does best. It holds up a mirror, not to morality, but to existence.